Speak in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Follow me. Those are Jesus' words this morning. Follow me. The first time he had said those words, they were life-changing for his disciples. You can remember that he was like walking along the sea, and he sees Andrew and his brother Simon, who called Peter, and James and John, working their family business, being fishermen. He says, follow me, and they get up, drop their nets, and go off and follow him. Later, he'll see Levi, who we called Matthew. He's got what really was a tax collector at the time. I mean, he's able to tax on behalf of Rome, and by charging more, he makes some money for himself. Jesus says, follow me, and he leaves it behind. Follow me, and they do. And it must have been just a kick, right? I mean, in the early days of Jesus' ministry, going around, you don't know how all this is going to go, and the next thing you know, the blind are receiving the sight, the lame are walking, the deaf hear, and the poor, the lost, the lonely, and the left out are noticed and cared for. Compassion is what Jesus has everywhere he goes. Compassion, it means to suffer with. Suffering with somebody, compassion, and we see it all the time. Jesus' life was really cruciform in many ways, and I mean that well before we get to the cross. That image that Michael Chaney shared on the bulletin cover of Jesus there with his arms stretched wide is actually by the Chinese Christian artist He, and he's painting Jesus stilling the storm, Jesus stretching out his arms and saying peace, but it's intentionally cruciform. It's intentionally showing his arms already stretched out, because Jesus' whole life was a life stretched out to others, to bring them in the reach of what God was doing through him. And so that's happening, this compassion, this love, this mercy, and the status quo didn't like it then any better than the status quo does now, but things start to shift in our reading for today. Jesus says, follow me, but he puts it in a different context. The words are this: if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Take up your cross and follow me. That's some serious stuff. I mean, this was meant literally, right? They understand what this is. This would be like, take up your noose and come follow me during the time of Jim Crow. This is serious. This is not come suffer for nothing. This is come help me show the compassion, grace, love, mercy that come from God alone. And it may cost you. In fact, it would. The thing that we know about the beginnings of the Jesus movement is after his death, resurrection, and ascension, that they continued to tell stories of his life. And what we have in Mark's gospel today, we know was first the preaching of Peter. So Simon Peter went out and he would preach, and John Mark would travel around with him and began to write these stories down that Peter told them after Peter was put to death, crucified upside down, because he asked them to do that because he said he was unworthy to die like Jesus had died. After Peter's death, John Mark writes them down into what we call the Gospel of Mark. And by that time, by the year 60 or so, everybody understood that this was not metaphorical, that taking up your cross and following Jesus meant standing up with that same sort of compassion, grace, love, and mercy, and the status quo could push back. The Roman Empire didn't mind lining up crosses by the roadside. And there's still places in the world where people die for their faith. Certainly we saw that tragically years ago with a group of Christians killed by Boko Haram for their faith, taken out on the beach and beheaded. But for us, what does it mean? It can't be a metaphor only. And so as I've tried to pray through this over the years, what I've seen is that we are to die to ourselves, to die daily to ourselves. And as I was praying through how to share that with you, how to make it real, and it's that we're supposed to take on this compassion, this suffering with others that Jesus had. And if we get it right, then we can experience something even of people that we don't yet know, learn something of their experiences, help stand alongside them. And I want to unpack that. But I first, when I was looking at this, saw a short film recently where I thought that it had been gotten so tragically wrong that it was worth noting, not in the film itself, but in the and the way that the filmmaker made it. It was Kim Novak. She's got a Academy Award nominated film, and I'll put a link to it in the chat, and I'll get it onto Facebook for the others. 13 minutes, it's brief to watch, but what she does is she takes the only case where Sigmund Freud worked with the life of a woman. It's called Hysterical Girl, and she shows it alongside, well, more recent footage of Supreme Court confirmations and other times that women still aren't being listened to, that their experiences aren't being valued or taken into account. And she shows it with this sort of primary case of Freud, who could be so insightful in many ways. But when he meets a young woman who's suffering from abuse, he assumes she must be hysterical. She's from a good family. These things can't be happening. It must be something else. And to see how somebody who can be so insightful missing it, because I'm just wondering what that is. And it reminded me of Henry James Garrett book. Henry James Garrett's wonderful, a winsome guy. You really should follow him on Instagram and Facebook, where he's got these wonderful little drawings. Let's see if I can screen share one here. This is one where he's showing the bird. Our experience of the world is very different, but that doesn't mean you're lying about your experience to the bat. And the bird needing to learn from the bat what the bat's worldview is and what that life is like. And in that same way, he's got this empathy handbook. This book will make you kinder. That really does a good job of sort of sharing the ways in which compassion can be made real in a way that even Freud missed. This book will make you kinder. There's an example in it. He tells about a guy. He says, imagine you're on a bus and there's no seats available, so you stand in the aisle, you're impatient, and you don't realize that through the whole ride, you're standing on someone else's foot. You got your toe right underneath you, and you're kind of crushing it down, and the elderly man who's there doesn't want to say a thing. He just sits in pained, stoic silence. Now, he adds that, look, I'm British. All my examples are British. If you can't imagine somebody on a subway with pained, stoic silence, then you haven't been on a bus in Britain. And, anyway, but what he says is, that, beyond that stiff upper lip, the thing is, you obviously you'd take your foot off if you knew that you were causing them pain. The problem is sometimes we're not open to what's happening with others. And so we're not open in the ways that we're causing the pain. If we don't see the pain others are facing, well, like for me, because of my actions or the actions of society, then we won't act for change. I'll give you an example. So if you see someone addicted to heroin is different, flawed, not like you and me, then we can't work together for better paths out of this most cruel addiction. I mean, for many folks, it began with prescription painkillers. And my own reading about the opioid crisis has expanded my empathy for those enslaved by a very cruel morphine molecule. I mean, and this isn't like academic. That means whether or not we're going to have naloxone around to help somebody who finds themselves overdosing, because we know it can take multiple times in recovery for somebody to finally really break free of that cycle. So this is where it's real world stuff we may do differently if we find a way to have empathy, compassion for somebody else. I was thinking through it for today, and I remembered a thing that happened here down the street at St. Paul's, Savannah. Louis Crew was in town. He was a real champion for making room for gay and lesbian persons in the Episcopal Church, and then for LGBTQ plus persons. And he was talking about that shift in his own life. Louis Crew founded the Episcopal group Integrity, and in 1974, and at that time, his cause was making a way for gay and lesbian Episcopalians to be fully part of the life of the church, ordained, married, everything. And then along the way, he began to hear LGBT, and he said, I got to tell you, I was upset about it. We might make some headway, we might get there, but how am I going to do it if I have to carry bisexual and transgender persons with me whose stories are so very different? And he said, and then I stopped and I listened to my siblings and they told me their stories and my heart was broken. I realized that I couldn't be free if they weren't free, and that their struggle was my struggle, and I didn't have a choice about it. It was going to have to be all the letters we needed to have, because otherwise we were never going to get where we were trying to go with the compassion that God has. I don't know how you do it. For me, I mean, I grew up in a fairly fundamentalist context. I grew up going to a fundamentalist school where I never read all those books in high school that people read. That just wasn't part of my experience. So as I found really through my experience in college, a way of looking back on my life and realizing some of what I'd missed and beginning to put the pieces together. I've been on a lifelong reading journey that's also been augmented by a lifelong journey of, well, dinner conversations with people, listening. I mean, like yesterday, I just finished reading Dr. Bertice Berry's book, Redemption Song. She's a sociologist here in Savannah. And she talks in it about, it's a novel, but it's really about the impossibility of love for enslaved persons during the time of slavery, and then the generational trauma that that inflicts, and seen through a couple who now today can sort of lay claim to love in a way their ancestors could not. And she so beautifully weaves that together in a way that is just so compassionate. Compassion, how we die daily to ourselves, seeing others as God sees them, looking not to our own interest, but the interest of others. That's what I'm talking about. When Jesus said, follow me, he said, follow me to remake the world to a just and good place for everyone, everyone. The thing that I see is that Jesus is still ahead of me anyway. Jesus taking care of those who are others see as unlovable, looking back with compassion to me and to you and saying, follow me. Follow me. Taking up your cross may not seem like something, it may not seem real until you find ways in which you need to take a stand that will cost you, in which you're standing up for someone because of the compassion you have from Jesus. Amen.